All right, folks, from the muddy banks of the North Saskatchewan River right here in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. This is Jack Antonio for Do You Know Jack, the podcast. And of course, on the line, I have Prince Albert's own Matt Remenda, who just a couple of days ago played a pretty exciting little venture up here called Chesterfest. Matt, how are you doing, man?
Oh, I am fantastic. How are you doing?
Great. Well, of course, now I never would have heard hide nor hair of you had you not played Chesterfest. So first of all, let me say congratulations on putting on a first-rate show, man. You really killed it out there.
Oh, thanks, Jack. Appreciate it.
So listen now, I understand though that you turned your back on Prince Albert and you went to the big city of Saskatoon a number of years ago, but I think there's a pretty good reason for that, right? You're a biologist, I hear.
Yeah, so I lived in PA and was playing a lot of music. I worked at Mosaic Music for a number of years, music store from back home, and then I ended up moving to Saskatoon to attend the University of Saskatchewan, and that consumed maybe 5 years of my time or something like that. And
Sure.
So I've been living here since then.
So now listen, what makes a biologist want to pick up a guitar?
Well, I used to play music a ton kind of before I came to school. And again, working at the music store, that was a big part of my life. I had together this band, the Matt Remenda Ensemble.
Yeah.
And it became a challenge to keep playing once school kind of ramped up, school and work and life just sort of happened. But then once I finished, that made me think, okay, well, what now? And so I got back into it. It was immediately throw a band together and start playing as much as we possibly could.
Yeah. Well, now, you've snatched some pretty top quality musicians. I mean, is this because you were already a bit of an entity in Saskatoon? Like, how difficult was it to grab the level of talent that you seem to have been able to grab hold of?
Largely a lot of coincidence. Nathan, the drummer, he's from Prince Albert, and we've been friends for years, and he moved to Saskatoon for a similar reason. He got a comp sci degree, and he ended up inviting me to come play with the Louis house band on their Monday night jams. And through that, I ended up meeting the other two, Cam, our keyboard player, and then Mike, our bass player. And so from that, we played together a ton kind of while we were in school. But that's really all that I was doing. Meanwhile, they were playing in a bunch of other bands. And we always kind of talked about, we'll throw together a band someday. It's one of those like Blues Brothers things where, we're going to get the band back together. Like that for years. And then finally, just kind of everything aligned and it was perfect. I didn't have too much going on. So we decided that, all right, well, you know what? I've got these songs. Let's release this CD and see where it goes. Maybe we can get into the studio and record some other stuff. And it was just one thing led to the other. And so here we are.
So now, before I hit record, we had a bit of a chat, and you mentioned the fact that your first EP, So Long Forgotten, you recorded that in, at your then place of work, I would imagine, Mosaic Music 6 years ago. I mean, was the same guys that are in Matt Remenda Ensemble now the guys that you sort of tapped on the shoulder to play for you back then?
No, those guys, they are both Prince Albertans, the ones who played in the band before. And that was part of it. Part of the trouble was once I moved to Saskatoon, it was a little bit tough to get them to come here to play the odd gig kind of thing. And that was ultimately what resulted from kind of the band dissolving over time.
Yeah.
So it was two different guys, Jeremy and James, who were fantastic. Like, again, they are terrific, but they're still in Prince Albert. And so it was more of a challenge. I needed someone who was a little bit closer here. And I lucked out because these three are some of the heaviest cats that I could ever ask for. Yeah.
Well, having seen you guys play together, I definitely wouldn't argue that about the portly cats. Well, listen, man, I do want to talk about your recent EP release, First the Heart. But I mean, before we get into that, Matt, I mean, Prince Albert, I mean, and going to, Carleton, I mean, it's not exactly dangerous minds per se, but I mean, how did your upbringing in Prince Albert affect you musically and artistically, do you figure?
Well, there's quite a bit to it. I would say first off, the community of super high quality musicians that are there. Like I don't know what it is. There's something about that city that seems to be all of these very heavy players end up retiring or teaching music there. And so I think it's undeniable that there's just a huge concentration of fantastic musicians and a terrific artistic community that's in that town. And so that being said, it's kind of, it's funny because you'll tell people that you're from Prince Albert and you kind of expect that if they're not from the province, they might not know where that is. But if they're a musician, if they went to McEwen or they went to music school or whatever, they'll say, oh yeah, there's this great player that I went to school with. They're from Prince Albert. And
yeah.
So yeah, like PA does a really good job at just kind of fostering creativity, and again, like terrific music teachers seem to be there, and so we end up with all of these fantastic musicians that come out of it.
Yeah. Well, now, did you take music when you went to school here in PA, to high school, I mean?
I took music, like I took band and things like that for years. I didn't actually take any sort of formal guitar lessons, but when I was working for Rich at Mosaic, he's a phenomenal guitar player. I could never expect to be as good as he is, but he mentored me quite a bit. And so we didn't really sit down a lot and have kind of conventional lessons, but he would give me lots to work on all throughout those years. And even beyond that, he knows the industry pretty well. And so he helped kind of educate me, okay, well, you want to be a guitar player, here's what you got to do. And so he was really, it was so much more than lessons that I got from him.
Yeah. Well, now, of course, you mentioned the fact that, PA has a good community of musicians. And of course, I wouldn't argue, with a program like Jam Street and of course with Mosaic being around too, that PA is a good, city for fostering creative development. But in terms of the actual live music scene, am I right in maybe saying it's not as healthy as it should be, perhaps?
Yeah, it's tough because there's all these great musicians that seem like they're ready to play, but there just doesn't seem to be much of I don't want to knock anyone for what they are doing, and it's been many years since I've been there, but
we all got to live and work in this area, so I mean we can't be overly critical, but
yeah, it's like it was tough. I remember especially kind of when I was in high school and not really being able to play bars too much. Like it happened for sure. Like there was a lot of sneaking into bars in order to play a couple of sets kind of thing. But there wasn't really much for kind of all age type venues. And then once I got a little bit older and was able to play the bars, I still found that there wasn't really a whole lot of avenues. And I know that I wasn't alone in that regard. There was an awful lot of, again, musicians that were terrific that were just kind of sitting on their hands and needing to get out because that was kind of the only way that they were going to be able to see a stage every week kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I would imagine part of it is just proximity to Saskatoon and the fact that, comparatively, Saskatoon seems to have several first-rate venues of varying size and degree, of which many, I would imagine, in your brief career in music, you've probably played at a few. I mean, you mentioned you did an album release at Amigos, but there's it seems to be quite a few. Like I've gone to the Black Cat a few times in the last few months. That seems to be the kind of punk / metal type venue,
Yeah, it's terrific because there's almost kind of a clique that kind of falls into place with sort of all of these different places. Like you've got Amigos, which does a lot of kind of weird stuff. Yeah, Black Cat is a lot of metal and punk. Capital does a lot of rock, and then of course like Buds is like very kind of dad rock type stuff.
Yeah. There's lots of good ones. Well, now one thing, of course, that I really was looking forward to talking to you about, and we mentioned it off the top, is Joel Rose and Kiana and Julie, of course, did a first-rate job of producing the very first, the inaugural Chesterfest, of which you had the honor of performing at. And I mean, here's PA stepping up to the plate. I mean, given the fact that you're local now and you've experienced the scene in Saskatoon as well, I mean, how did you find the inaugural Chesterfest in your honest opinion?
I was blown away. It was especially like considering it was a first year festival, that was something to see the amount of success that they had. But then, like, well beyond that, it was, as far as playing, like, I could not have asked for a better festival. Like, it felt like this had been 10 years running. Everything was slick. And I'm sure that people were running around with their heads cut off, like, behind the, but it certainly didn't come off that way to any of us that were either performing or onlooking to it. Like, everything, right down to sound, to personnel, to food, to bands. Like, it was just perfect.
Yeah. Well, and I love Joel, but man, he was moving quickly, and if you got any FaceTime with the man himself, it was in short supply.
That's true.
Yeah, I don't now. I know Joel is an accomplished musician as well as a technician as well when it comes to production and sound. So I mean, was he on your radar? Is that how you ended up on the Chesterfest ticket?
Yeah, so I like to hope that we did audition for it, and I like to hope that, I mean, the music spoke for itself. I hope that it was because we sounded good, but I've also known Joel for years. I remember him as just being kind of a kid that was coming into the music store all the time and kind of like milling over amps and buying guitars. He ended up working there for a while after I had left. And so, like, we have a long history together, and he, as a player, has always been fantastic. He really dove right into the PA system stuff. Like, in fact, now he runs incredibly successful business. He's a great sound tech. But I sold him his first PA.
Oh, wow.
In fact, so, like, we go way back.
Yeah. Well, now, I mean, it can't be all roses. I mean, what's an area that you think Chesterfest could improve on for next year?
Well, I guess, again, like, it came off as super sleek from the front end, and there was not a lot else that I could ask for from that side. However, it did seem like, again, Joel, Deanna, and Julie, like, very little FaceTime with them, and it seemed like they were running all over the place. And so I guess it would be nice if they could, I don't know, hopefully expand it, because I get it's the first year where they're probably going to be doing everything sort of themselves, although they did have terrific volunteers. But obviously they're going to be running around. And so I guess I would hope that in following years they would have enough people to kind of pick up slack so that it's not just a completely losing your mind, they're stressed kind of thing, if that was the case.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it's good that you bring that up. Of course, moving here from Yellowknife last summer, I had a lot of experience working in and around the Folk on the Rocks Music Festival. I'm not sure if you've heard of that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, now here's a festival that sometimes can fly by the seat of its pants a little bit, but I mean, at the same time, there's an entire infrastructure and organization underneath, and a lot of hundreds of people that work hard to support it. And I think moving forward, and this is no criticism of Joel or Kiana or Julie by any means, but I mean, I would hope that now that people have seen that PA can mount and produce a successful music festival, that we can get a lot of volunteers out and a lot of support in terms of sponsors and maybe even a board of directors, or all of those fancy schmancy things that some of these other quote unquote bigger festivals have underneath them, that keep it going and keep it a well-oiled machine, because quite frankly, I would love to see Chesterfest still going 30 years from now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's, no matter what, that's going to be the challenge of kind of a first-year festival that's, once again, like, Prince Albert has a long kind of standing history of trying to put on music festivals, but they oftentimes only last for a year or a couple of years, and then they just kind of disappear. But this one was by far, like, I got to separate it from those other ones, because this was a stunning success. And so, but you don't know going into it as to whether that's going to be the case. And so obviously, and no one does, like, sponsors, volunteers, etc. And so, I mean, completely hats off to everybody that did lend their time and kind of take that risk, unsure as to whether it was going to be as successful as it was.
Sure.
And again, now we have data to suggest that future years will be. So
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I was very, very happy to see the announcement come forward that they had essentially broken even because they're a not-for-profit, of course. So the fact that they didn't lose any money is huge, because that will, in the eyes of people that might want to step forward in the future and sponsor it. And of course, Canadian Tire was a fantastic sponsor, obviously. But I mean, in the eyes of future groups and organizations that are thinking about sponsoring Chesterfest, I think that'll bode well, definitely.
For sure.
Well, now listen, we did talk a little bit about your own personal music, and I mean, now that you've told me that, maybe around 2013 or 2012 is when So Long Forgotten was first recorded, I will say that there's a marked difference in the quality of production on First the Heart, and also the hooks in the songs. I mean, there's definitely been an evolution there as well. I mean, did you change much about your own personal process from one EP to the next that kind of gave it that extra little nudge?
Yeah, well, I think it wasn't really so much of kind of sitting down and nailing, okay, how are we going to do this? It was, it's quite a few years occurred between the recordings of those two.
Yes,
and so
of course.
I like to believe that I'm on the incline as far as being a musician is concerned. I still have no idea what I'm doing, but I like to believe that I have a lot more idea than I did when I recorded that first album. So
yeah, sure.
So part of it was, with that first album, it was kind of I had just moved to Saskatoon, and so I was kind of driving back to PA every once in a while in order to knock off a couple of songs here and there.
Yeah.
And so it didn't really end up particularly cohesive, just because it was like a collection of songs. It was just some things that I had written over a few years and just kind of threw together on this album. Now, with First the Heart, that one was done considerably differently. We all just hopped into a vehicle. We drove to Prince Albert. We got out and we tracked everything from beginning to end all in one day.
Yeah.
And all of the material ends up being a little bit closer in, I think, quality and, how do I put this, themes. And that's partially because most of that material kind of came out of, I guess, a period where I was consistently kind of relatively the same as far as a player is. Whereas in that first EP, it was like over 5 years I had written these songs, and I was obviously getting better at a much higher rate than I am now. And so it was just kind of all over the map as far as, is this a good song? This is a weird song. Like I just had no idea what I was doing.
Sure. Yeah. I think there's a clarity about the production in this one too that I picked up on almost immediately, and your vocals seem to be a lot more on point. I mean, was there somebody in the room working the board or producing that was sort of making sure that these two things kind of happened during those sessions?
Yeah, so Rich was, of course, he was the engineer for both of these out of Mosaic, and I guess that goes to speak for him too, because we are a fairly small band, and so we were operating on a shoestring budget on both of these projects. And the second time around, I think that we were better and easier musicians to work with. Also, like, the same can be said for production as well. Like, it's 6 years removed from when that first EP was recorded with even Rich's skill. And so I'm sure that he's gone through quite a few different motions. He's had some huge projects that he's worked on since then.
Sure.
Again, he's always been fantastic, but working with some kids on a shoestring budget that, I mean, I could drive back for an hour and kind of track something here and there, and we would send back and forth on a song, whether like the mix was there or not. Whereas this, I think, just everything aligned, and him and I are considerably better than we were the first time that we did this.
Yeah. Well, now I know you played these songs at Chesterfest, but I mean, just to give you a brief compliment, listening to First the Heart, I recognized every single song that you played at Chesterfest that was off that EP, I mean, you probably played every song, but I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, this is not forgettable material. It's memorable. It's instrumentally sound. There's elements of that kind of, quote unquote jam band style that I'm sure you're shooting for a little bit there. I mean, where does that aspect of your sound come from? Are you sort of a closeted Grateful Dead or Fish fan or what?
Yeah, like, I mean, I think that anyone who says they don't like Fish or Grateful Dead is crazy, but I guess this kind of jam type stuff, it emerges largely sort of on the way that we write music, because I'll frequently sit alone in a room and come up with kind of the seeds of a song, and then I'll take it to the group. And I'll just be like, okay, well, this is the song, and then we'll kind of hammer out the arrangement.
Sure.
And they just kind of go. They just pick their own parts, and they just get going. And if anyone has any kind of critical input, they just lay it forward. But for the most part, it's the seed of a song, and then just kind of set them free, and then everybody just does what they want, which doesn't work for everybody. But again, these three people that I play with, like, they are the most. They are the best guys that I could possibly name for this band, because I trust them so much to just do that. Yeah, for sure. Well, Cam's playing on the keys in First the Heart is just I'd say a sight to behold, but if you're listening, I suppose that's the wrong sensory perception. But I mean, I suppose that on the other hand, I did see him perform that stuff live. I mean, wow. Yeah, he's something else, and with the previous group, we didn't have that. It was we didn't have keys. We just had three of us playing as a trio, and so I was taking a lot more leads on everything. Right. But now I've got Cam to do plenty of leads, so frequently I don't even take them in songs, but when I do, we'll oftentimes do trade-off stuff, and we can feed off of each other in that regard. And so that's also allowed me to kind of concentrate a little bit more on vocals. So I'm not so worried about carrying the melody with my guitar work if Cam's doing it. And then I can just be rhythmic and then just worry about singing. Right. Well, now, not to keep you much longer, but I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, now that the dust has settled on Chesterfest, what's next in terms of the Matt Remenda Ensemble? What do you got going on for the remainder of the summer, sir? Well, we've got a few gigs booked here around Saskatoon. We've got a couple coming up in August, one of which in the back half is going to be at Amigos. Nice. And then we are playing this week, which is going to be on Friday at Taste of Saskatchewan. Oh, yeah, I did see that. Yeah, and beyond that, not really sure. We are getting enough material together to record another album. And so hopefully we'll be back in the studio within the next 6 months or so. But that's dependent on a lot of stars just kind of aligning. Yeah. And then looking even beyond that, kind of the plan was that because this group has only been playing together really since kind of October, so we haven't even hit a year yet. We were kind of just planning on taking this year in order to get really slick and then have the conversation about actually touring next year. So that's hopefully going to come. That would be something, man. Well, definitely good luck. In the meantime, where's the best place to pick up a copy of So Long Forgotten, and then of course the more recent First the Heart? What's going to make you the most amount of money? Well, for sure, at our shows, we do sell them as hard copies. Those still exist. However, that's something that's going away quite a bit. And so one thing that I would suggest, and there's not a lot of money that comes out of it, but it doesn't matter. But of course, Spotify, iTunes, that type of thing, if you aren't able to make it out to our shows. Well, right on, man. I mean, I say this to everybody, but I always mean it. But it's definitely been a pleasure and an honor being able to sit down and chat with you about, your music, your art, for sure. I mean, being a musician myself, I know that it's a passion and a labor of love. And it's important even just for your own process to get to talk about it a little bit, because I mean, I think there's a little bit of learning that happens as you pontificate about your own stuff, eh? Oh, absolutely. If lots of this stuff ends up just kind of internalized, and then once you say it out loud, it kind of becomes real. And so when you're asked these questions, these might be going on in your head all the time, but you don't end up getting kind of giving a concrete answer to yourself. And so when you sit down for an interview and you get asked these, it really just forces you to actually come up with an answer.
Well, there you go, man. Well, like I said, it's been awesome chatting with you today, man. And good luck and Godspeed. And I imagine I'll see you around at some point in the future. And we can catch up some more.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Jack.
Yeah. All right. Have a good day.
You too.